Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 6th of December 2021. I am joined as ever by my, well, not quite so festive as me, it seems, co-host, Mr. Andy Brockman. Once again, as you can tell, our office is firmly seeing in the season. When does the tinsel go up at House Brockman?
Well, this goes right back to when I was a kid. We normally do our Christmas decorations more or less the last Sunday before Christmas.
Okay, fair enough.
But then you know that's good. We tend to have a real tree and we keep it up until traditionally 12th night. So
yeah, 12th night.
Yeah. So and the needles can just about last that period without falling all over the floor. So that's good.
It's funny, actually, that, not to get off topic immediately, but it's interesting how many people do take down their decorations on Boxing Day. I've always found that to be very strange. But in our case, we tend to start at the beginning of December, largely because we just like the atmosphere. But actually, growing up, it was always a Christmas Eve mad dash. And often my mum would be up until 2 a.m. putting up decorations. She said it was because she liked the transformation for Christmas. I think it was because we always were just sort of slightly forgetful. But anyway, regardless,
it's one of those times of the year that's very difficult to lose track of, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I see what you did there. But we'll come back to Christmas parties, I think, at the end of this week's watching,
or not.
Anyway, regardless of our ability to remember things that did or did not happen, we are continuing with our watching.
Or may not have been a party.
We're going. It's at the end. We're talking about the. Our watching brief continues, and this week we're resuming normal service with a fairly normal, he says, watching brief with a couple of stories that are of interest. But before we get into those stories, is there anything that we want to say following last week's watching brief and what's happened in the time between now and then, or then and now?
The only thing I would say is that obviously the story that we ran about the apparent attempts by leading archaeological bodies to control messages about archaeology, and in particular to prevent an independent organisation, the Campaign to Save British Archaeology, campaigning for university archaeology. It has caused a few ripples, maybe, and I think the main thing, conversations are being had. Videos are being watched, and I think the main thing to be said is that Professor Howard Williams, who was one of our leading witnesses in our investigation, has published his own take on the events, which I think only serves to reinforce the story that we told. People in the sector will decide whether or not it's important and how to react.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I think we're going to make that probably the link of the week, I guess, below, so people can follow up if they want to by clicking onto that blog post. And we'll also we have an additional link of the week that I think is a bit of fun as well, and that is archaeology Twitter, and certainly I think academic Twitter exploded over the weekend, last weekend, just gone, with an AI bot that produces artwork based on inputs. So people have been putting in their the title of their thesis, or I actually put in archaeology, history, and soup. It got an interesting image, and then I put in as many academic texts have a title and then a subtitle, I put in the main title of my dissertation, and also got an interesting result. So that's something to play with, I guess, at home, if you haven't already. I mean, we're a week behind on that, but if you haven't come across it already, it's a bit of fun, and it may play into this year's Christmas celebrations. But again, that's for later. That's for later on, isn't it? Yeah. Right. All of that to one side. Let us begin, and we're starting with an interesting story that you brought my attention to on a website that I had never heard of, actually. Chasing Aphrodite: The Hunt for Looted Antiquities in the World's Museums. What is going on, Mr. Brockman?
Right. This is a story about the antiquities trade, and in particular a Chasing Aphrodite, which is one of the leading websites which looks at the issues around looted antiquities and the restitution of looted antiquities to the people they actually belong to and the countries they actually belong to. Carried a story based on a press release from the District Attorney for Manhattan, Vance Jr., who had been carrying out an investigation, his department had been carrying out an investigation into the antiquities trade in New York, and in particular to a collector called Michael Steinhardt, who is a billionaire hedge fund manager, founder. Basically, the core of the story, and it's always in the first paragraph, if you look at the press release that is in front of me now, it's what the Chasing Aphrodite story was based on. Michael Steinhardt had been investigated by the DA of Manhattan, and the upshot of it was that 180 stolen antiquities from his collection, which are valued at around $70 million, were going to be surrendered by Steinhardt and will be returned to the governments under whose jurisdiction they should have been all along.
Right.
And Steinhardt, in particular, has accepted what is described as a first-of-a-kind lifetime ban on acquiring further antiquities.
That's
now,
interesting. Sorry, I say interesting in so much as that, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but presumably if it's the first of its kind, is there going to be special measures to monitor this? Possibly.
I think this is a sign that legal jurisdictions are getting, certainly in the West, and obviously we're talking here about the United States, and under the United States system, the local district attorneys have quite a lot of power. They're significant local politicians and legal officers, and among other things on Vance's to-do list is an investigation against Donald Trump's business empire.
Never heard of him.
So this is apparently he had some kind of official office until about 18 months ago. But no, in all seriousness, the District Attorney of Manhattan in particular is one of the most powerful legal offices in the state. And so this is a really strong statement about, shall we say, the allegations that have been around for a long time that the antiquities trade, the commercial antiquities trade, the big arts, big museums and big auction houses have a somewhat, shall we say, occasionally loose relationship with the legalities of some of the objects that they acquire and then sell. Put it no stronger than that.
Expertly worded, Mr. Brockman.
Well, the investigation, Vance's department, in this press release about the Steinhardt case, they state that the investigation just into that particular case and those 180 stolen antiquities involved 11 countries, tracking 12 different criminal smuggling networks, and that is, we're talking about a major deployment of investigatory resources over a number of years, and involving the legal and police entities in, as I say, 11 different countries, from the Far East through Western Europe to the United States. It should be said as well that one particular item, which is a bull's head sculpture that was found in Lebanon, was put into storage and was stolen by Falangist militias during the Lebanese Civil War, and ended up being exported via the Geneva Freeport to the States. It really exposes the whole mechanism, really, by which these objects are acquired, trafficked, sometimes stored. The issue of free ports is a significant one, and we're seeing that being talked about again in Britain, because free ports are central to Chancellor Rishi Sunak's economic plans for the country. But as we see in this case, they can be used for ill as well as good.
But we're also seeing, actually, similarly, and we've talked about this in previous watching briefs, in this country, a growing confidence, or at the very least a growing public desire, to apparently monitor valuable objects that may have a tie to national heritage stories, and I've speculated that, coupled with free ports in this country, actually what some of these laws might be about is not so much making sure that valuable, especially items with gold and silver content, don't leave the country, as it were, without being monitored and possibly taxed or not taxed in the right way, but also and also therefore maybe adding and being able to add to the national story, but it actually may be part of enabling a more fluid international exchange of goods. The thing is, we won't know until all of this stuff comes in this country how this works and what the barriers and checks are. It's just an interesting thing to compare here. Here, the use of free ports absolutely was a factor. And this deputy DA, Matthew Bogdanos, I believe is how you pronounce his name, also found time to write a book during the course of his investigation, The Thieves of Baghdad, One Marine's Passion to Recover the World's Greatest Treasures. It's a heck of a story, and I suppose a question that I'm curious about, because this is the first time I'm properly hearing about this. I think I've heard bits and bobs over the years, but to what extent do you think this is going to prove a useful case study for archaeologists who are interested in this, or frankly anyone who's interested in these sorts of networks? Because there have been some really good journals over the years. There are journals of illicit antiquities and so on and so forth that publish analyses of some networks, but this, as a cohesive story, looks like it could be a really useful case study.
It certainly is. Anybody that's interested in this, I'd urge to go to, and we'll put the link below the line, but I would go to the what's called an application for a turnover order to the Supreme Court of the State of New York, which is in fact filed by Matthew Bogdanos, the attorney who was in charge of this particular case. And it's only 68 pages long, but it's written very clearly, and it lays out the entire track, really, of this particular bull's head artifact, how it was acquired, how it was stolen, how it was trafficked, how it was then put onto the commercial market, and ended up in the hands of two private collectors, the last of whom is Steinhardt. But how the whole thing also came about because it was lent to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, one of the world's great art museums. And that's where it was spotted that it was potentially stolen. So again, it's hugely embarrassing, not just for the commercial antiquities trade, but also for what you might say is the legitimate museum world.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. So I should say I giggled there because the idea of someone saying, "Let me see your warrant," and you producing a 66-page document is quite funny. Do you think maybe they showed it on an iPad? Maybe that what happened at the door.
It was. I need to make clear. It was the application for a warrant.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think
so the warrant would still just be a piece of paper.
It was the legal case. It was the legal case for the judge to grant a warrant, which of course they won.
Okay, but also I use the word vulnerable there very deliberately, in so much as it's interesting how the lending of artifacts from seemingly private collections to public spaces does make them, as it were, vulnerable to scrutiny, and I'm going to have to read this book. I'm going to have to look into this in more detail, I think, and I advise people at home to do similar. Shall we?
I think it's worth finishing actually with just a quote from the DA Vance's department press release about this whole case, because it sets out really the intellectual and the humanitarian and just the humanitarian actually rationale for this. We talk a lot about restitution and reparation and so on. And we talk about the Benin bronzes. We've talked recently about the Parthenon marbles, and this is where those issues become very stark because we are dealing here with definitely caught, banged to rights, plundered artifacts.
Yes. Yeah.
And what DA Vance's department said in the press release, quote, for decades, Michael Steinhardt, collector, displayed a rapacious appetite for plundered artifacts without concern for the legality of his actions, the legitimacy of the pieces he bought and sold, or the grievous cultural damage he wrought across the globe. His pursuit of new, quote, new additions to showcase and sell knew no geographic or moral boundaries, as reflected in the sprawling underworld of antiquities traffickers, crime bosses, money launderers, and tomb raiders he relied upon to expand his collection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then this is, I think this is the key point. Even though Steinhardt's decade-long indifference to the rights of peoples to own their sacred treasures is appalling, the interests of justice prior to indictment and trial favour a resolution that ensures a substantial portion of the damage to world cultural heritage will be undone once and for all. Accordingly, this agreement guarantees that 180 pieces will be returned expeditiously to their rightful owners in 11 countries, rather than be held as evidence for the years necessary to comply with a grand jury indictment, trial, potential convictions, and sentence.
Yeah.
In other words, they've moved to get the stuff that is clearly stolen returned to proper jurisdictions as soon as practical.
Yeah. So it's not just hanging around in limbo. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Hobby Lobby. Anyway, so
to be fair, the American courts move quite quickly on Hobby Lobby as well, and and it has to be fair to Hobby Lobby, they did hand everything over without too much of a fight. So
yeah.
yes,
but again, if you're talking about the acquisition of artifacts in
look, our friends at the Hobby Lobby were at the very, I suppose, very kindly naive and driven by an ideology. In that they wanted to create the Museum of the Bible to represent their views of the history of the Middle East and the religions of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Steinhardt is a top of the range, very experienced collector over many years, dealing with the very top of the international art market, antiquities market. So in a sense, he's if Hobby Lobby is is League One at best, middle table championship, Steinhardt is Premiership in terms of collectors, and to have a collector like that accept a lifetime ban on collecting further antiquities, I think is quite significant, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one last question. Presumably he was accepting this in lieu of, for example, a prison sentence or some other potential punishment. I'm not sure what the exact deal is, but it does. Yes, but it certainly looks like some sort of arrangement has been come to. Yeah. Okay. He'll surrender the material. He'll accept a lifetime ban, and then they'll as currently understood, they may well leave him alone. But the reputational damage is done. That said, though, with those empty shelves, now he can go to the Hobby Lobby and start crafting. He can put some of his own artwork on display. This is an opportunity for him. Anyway, moving on.
I'm not going there.
Moving on. We have a story in the Tatler, which I found very interesting. And I'm always interested in stories in the Tatler, because the Tatler is the newspaper that appears in the Hannibal stories, especially in Red Dragon, I think. The Tatler features very prominently there, and I thought it wasn't a real thing until not that long ago when I came across my first.
Have you never been to a dentist?
No.
No,
I have, but I've never seen the Tatler in a dentist's chair.
The Tatler, Country Life, all those magazines that you never know anybody who buys. They appear in dentist waiting rooms.
Yeah, I had no idea. I didn't know. I do go to the dentist. I have an appointment in January, in fact, for a filling. So anyway, this is the story of the Comte de Paris, who is demanding the return of Chateau de Chantilly, because he thinks it's being mistreated. The descendant of France's last king, the pretender to the French throne, is infuriated by plans to turn his old family estate into an uber luxury hotel. This is a curious situation, because the Comte de Paris. Well, Jean is his name, and he's the senior male descendant by primogeniture of the male line of King Louis Philippe, who ruled France as France's last king. Is accusing the state of not adhering to his ancestors' wishes, that the estate not be altered in any meaningful way. It's supposedly going to be turned into a state-of-the-art hotel under current plans. And previously, it has actually been used as a film set. I didn't realise this, but it's in A View to a Kill. It's Mr. Zorin's house, apparently. This is an interesting situation, though, because it speaks to the relationship between, I suppose, the state bequeathment and changing times, and the ability for states to actually hold on to these sorts of places of interest in a way that isn't a burden necessarily in especially in financial terms. Apparently in 1886, an ancestor of the Comte de Paris donated the estate, which also includes a second smaller chateau and numerous outbuildings, to the Institute of France, a body that represents and promotes French culture, particularly in the UK. But there were strings attached to the donation, notably that the architecture of the chateau and its outbuildings would never be modified or objects in them moved. Failure to respect the Duke's wishes would lead to the revocation of the bequest and the return of the estate to the Duke's family under the agreement according to the Comte de Paris. What do you think of this? It's interesting because we often find situations where there are buildings of interest, especially to a local community, that either are deemed to be in the way, possibly of progress, maybe for a housing development, or they're deemed to be no longer really functional, but they are sort of often of architectural interest. And if local authorities, particularly, for example, in this country, councils, can't afford their upkeep, then their destiny becomes quite ardently debated. Often they're either going to be demolished or they're going to be put on some sort of list somewhere. They're going to be listed or protected in some other way. Is this sort of negotiating a tension here that maybe there are other ways of dealing with? For example, should the current Comte de Paris take ownership of that building if the Institute can't look after it?
I think this is one of those really interesting, really complicated stories when there's actually more to it than maybe meets the eye in terms of a simple exposition like that. I mean, you're quite right. I mean, people who follow horse racing might recognise the name Chantilly, because of the racecourse, which is associated with the chateau. That people, medievalists, will almost certainly be familiar with the illustrations from the Trésorier de les Ducs de Paris, which is a very famous book of hours, medieval book of hours, and that is held in the library at the chateau, the Petit Chateau de Chantilly. This is culturally, this is right at the centre of certainly French culture, certainly medieval European culture, but also modern high-end sport, specifically with the horse racing. And in fact, if you look into the history of restorations at the site, for example, in 1998, the World Monuments Fund put it on its watch list because of water infiltration and high humidity. And then again in 2002, they extended that to concerns about the entire estate.
So are there potentially questions here as to why complain now? Is that what you're getting at?
What I'm saying is this is not just a one-off story. This is a story that has been running for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
For example, in the noughties, the Aga Khan donated 40 million euro to a roughly 70 million project, which the Institut de France had initiated at the site. This argument about how to pay for the restoration and upkeep of sites like this, it's not just a one-off. And they're who, you know, given the family connection with the Duke, the pretender to the French thrones, there may well be other personal and family issues in play here as well. The underlying point is a simple one. I think it's these massively important but also massively expensive buildings. We collectively, as societies, as communities, but also governments, have to come to an agreement, an understanding, a compromise that, you know, first of all, these things are important to preserve, and then how to preserve them and under what circumstances and with what permutations. I mean, you know, if you take it back to a more simple level, the current British listing system, you are able to get listed building consent for changes to a listed building, which really the top 5% of buildings. It's easier to get listed building consent for example, a grade 2 building or a grade 2 star building than it is for a grade 1 building.
Yes.
Which is seen as the most important. But underlying all of it is the sense that very few buildings can be preserved absolutely in their entirety as museums, but that they have to find some sort of function as a living building.
Well, and presumably a part of that would be ongoing changes in infrastructure, heating systems, internet, you know, toilet provision.
Well, look, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the big questions after the fire at Notre Dame a couple of years ago has been fire safety.
Yeah.
What do we do? Do you install modern alarm systems and modern fire suppression and sprinkler systems in, for example, a medieval building? Is that possible, or do you just have to, take put in all the possible preventative measures that you can, hope it doesn't happen, and if it does happen, then you then decide what kind of restoration you go in for. Like Park Park in Sussex, where the National Trust rebuilt a building that burnt out.
Yeah, were you going to say living on a hope and a prayer there?
You could put it like that.
I heard it. You were very close.
Well, there's been a lot of talk in the last few days about governments winging it, or the British government winging it, and there is in all seriousness, these are such difficult issues with such big sums of money potentially involved on both sides. Whatever you do, then there is an element of sort of cross your fingers behind your back when you take a decision. Yeah. We're linking this story with an interesting development surrounding Reading Jail, and in this instance, a very prominent artist, Banksy. You may have heard of him. Whoever he or she is.
Whoever he is, yeah, exactly. Nick Abbott.
Actually, no, we're pretty sure it's a he, aren't we? It's,
whoever they are, yeah. Who's inserted
absolutely. Let's be non-binary about it.
Inserted themselves into a discussion over the future of Reading Jail. He's offered to raise millions of pounds towards buying what's now known as Reading Prison, where Oscar Wilde was once held, so that it can be turned into an arts venue. This is from the BBC. The artist has promised to match the jail's £10 million asking price by selling the stencil he used to paint on the Grade 2 listed building in March. He said, converting the place that destroyed him, Wilde, into a refuge for art feels so perfect, we have to do it. The MOJ, Ministry of Justice, said that the deadline for bids has passed. However, it added, we are currently considering the ones that we have received. So, who knows? Who knows exactly what that means? A spokesperson for Banksy told the BBC that the pledge of funds was dependent on the Ministry of Justice awarding the bid to Reading Borough Council, and the jail being turned into a centre for the arts. So, I mean, actually, this is not only, as you say, this sort of thing has been going on forever, because actually this feels very current because it's addressing an issue that lots of buildings face at the moment in this country, and obviously it's a very prominent, very mysterious and interesting artists getting involved. But actually, is this just good old-fashioned philanthropy? Is this the sort of thing that wealthy people were doing 150, 200 years ago as a matter of course in some respects? In that sense, it's a very public act that he's undertaking or offering to undertake in this instance.
That's true, and certainly recent Conservative governments in particular have tried to promote individual philanthropy as a means of replacing, put it bluntly, state funding for the arts. There are a number of things in play with Reading Prison as is, Reading Jail as was. It's a Victorian prison, obviously. In a sense, it was a public building, has been a public building in the ownership of the state for well over a century. It is now on the market because it's deemed surplus to the prison estate. And it's on the market for redevelopment. It is listed, grade 2 listed, but that doesn't mean it can't be changed. There are a number of other factors involved. In particular, it's most associated, obviously, with, in prison terms, with Oscar Wilde, who was in prison there for 2 years doing hard labour after he was convicted for gross indecency. Our viewers may be, familiar with the numerous plays and films. There was a very good film with Stephen Fry, for example, playing Wilde, about that whole affair. And while he was in jail, he wrote one of his most famous works, De Profundis, which was a letter to his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas. And then after he left, he wrote possibly his most famous work altogether, The Ballad of Reading Jail. Certainly his most famous work outside of the plays. So that in itself will be enough to justify, I think, interest in it as a building, and recognizing its historical value as a building. Even more than that,
go. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that there's another point which for archaeologists is perhaps even sharper, which is that the jail is built on the site of Reading Abbey. And Reading Abbey was the resting place of King Henry I, who was buried under the high altar. And it's currently estimated that that site is under the prison car park, or possibly under the prison walls.
Oh, not another car park.
Well, you've said that. I wasn't going to go there, but yeah, they could have another king in the car park.
Yeah. Oh dear. Okay. Well, what I was going to say as well was that in addition, therefore, to an arts historical connection, there's also clearly this is queer history as well. This is something which which
absolutely
is
absolutely, and that point has been made in connection. Matt Rother is the Labour MP for Reading East. Said that he was hoping to put ministers on the spot over Banksy's offer. And he said, quote, "There are these amazing layers of history. There's literary history and LGBT community history and the link to Oscar Wilde. But there's also some local and national Victorian social history and the links to the royal family all in one building. It's so well connected to the rest of the country." And then, there are many reasons for it to be preserved as in a way that recognizes its importance to history and to the arts, and to those underrepresented and ignored, previously ignored audiences and communities like the LGBTQ plus community.
Apparently, it was built in 1844 and was decommissioned in 2014. So 160 years in service and still standing. Just very briefly before we, I suppose, start to bring this all to a close. What's the current state of play when it comes to graffitiing a grade 2 listed building? Like, presumably, had he not been Banksy, it would have been carefully taken off the brickwork, I guess, wouldn't it?
We are into a very tricky area here, aren't we? You're referring to if people aren't familiar with it, Banksy painted on the walls of Reading Jail a prisoner, apparently a prisoner in stripy prison uniform, climbing down some knotted bed sheets, weighted at the bottom with a typewriter. It's a very striking image. It's a wonderful image. What one suspects that given the time it probably took to create it and so on, it wasn't done altogether without the knowledge of the authorities. I hate to say this, but perhaps maybe blind eyes were turned. I don't know. And also, we don't know entirely what the materials are, whether they were. Well, in fact, we know it was created from a stencil, because that's what he's offering to sell. Yeah. That's what he's offering to sell, which is estimated at. We talked about the commercial arts world in our first item. This is perhaps a positive use of the commercial arts world to hopefully return a building like this to public ownership through selling it not even the work of art, but something that was used to create the work of art.
So we've come full circle.
Yeah,
not entirely as smoothly entirely more smoothly than we might have thought we had planned. But that's quite a nice place to bring it to a close. So I suppose actually not much in the way of conclusions here, but a lot ongoing, an awful lot to think and talk about. I suppose that's what we're presenting this week for you guys to add to the discussion below in the comments. Please do. I think just to finish, it's worth saying, people have to take part in these debates, or solutions will be imposed on us, and we have to debate and decide collectively what the value of these things is, and we do have a problem. I mean, I'm seeing it at the moment in a case I'm involved with personally, whereby. I won't go into details, but for example, the entity that is has ownership of a building that a group I'm involved with wishes to take on. We're currently trying to persuade them that public value merits us taking it on a peppercorn rent rather than as they see it to maximise the value by a full commercial rent. Is this because you're trying to get a blue plaque on your house? Is that it? You just. Andy Brockman lived here, or lives here.
No. No,
I'm joking.
Spitfires weren't buried here in 1945.
Exactly. No, I see what you mean. Yeah, exactly. These are very live issues, and we look forward to seeing the conversation continue. Undoubtedly, we'll return to this sort of stuff in the future as well. I suppose at this point we should address our plans for Christmas. We do have an Christmas special planned in some form, but we're currently tying down exactly what that form will be. But regardless, there'll be we're aiming for a live stream, I think, aren't we?
I think we are. Although I think we do need to point out that last year's Christmas special has actually been cancelled.
Yes.
It didn't happen.
Didn't happen. No. Definitely not.
Alcohol was not consumed.
There was no quiz, nothing.
No pre-planned games.
No.
Didn't happen.
For viewers and listeners in the future, just look at what was happening in Britain in December 2021, and you'll see why we're a bit punch drunk. I think this week it's been an interesting week. Last week was a very serious story, and then nationally we're in a very strange situation in terms of Christmas parties and the government, shall we say? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yes. So put it this way: in the greater scheme of things, the country is facing economic crisis and a national pandemic, and the government seems to be obsessed with a Christmas party that may or may not have happened, like Schrödinger's cat. In fact, Schrödinger's cat may have been invited to the party for all we know.
Well, that's true. 7 parties.
It's 7 now, is it?
Yeah. 7.
Oh my god, they found it. They found even more. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
But anyway, last year didn't happen.
No.
Right, guys.
No. And in fact, all will no doubt be revealed in the new Matrix movie that apparently is now on the cards.
Oh, I can't wait! I cannot wait for that. But that's getting way off topic. Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Until then, do take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.